So we're going to record this, and we're also.
I like it.
And I need to close my I don't know why, but my screen opened up, and I'm now streaming everybody. So, but yeah. So welcome to the podcast, the first one, and it's Jokae, right?
Right.
We like to welcome Jokae to the hot seat. For those, this if your first time here at the podcast for Flameless. The podcast. So what we do here is we meet singles. We talk about, their lives. We get a little bit about them. We get to know them. And this is more like a meet and greet. And we also have a topic to talk about tonight. We'll talk about rebuilding trust, vulnerability. And is it even possible to do that? And we'll have that discussion tonight. But we always like to start off first by asking everybody, if it's your first time here, if you got a link from other groups, we ask that you go and join our group, and, do a like on our page. We also will have past episodes will be on our YouTube page. So if you want to search Flameless Fireside YouTube page, there you can subscribe, click on the bell. It will let you know when we have new videos uploaded. We try to keep all of our videos unedited. So all the mistakes and everything we do, it's all going to be live, and it'll be unedited on YouTube. And so you can go back there and watch past episodes. So with that being said, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our first host, Terry. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Terry. I am the creator and admin of 35 and Wiser. You are probably in my group.
Yes.
And I will pass it off to Monica.
Hi, I'm Monica. I am not an admin of anything. I just am me. It's nice to meet you.
Just like me, Monica. I'm just,
Yay.
I just look like a homeless guy sometimes with my beard. So I don't know. It's like I get in between my beard. I want to grow it out long, and then it starts looking really bad. So then I trim it, and then I just look homeless. Like I got laid off a couple weeks ago. So
I like the gray. Nice, distinguished.
Very distinguished. Well, welcome, Jokae. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New Mexico, about 3 miles from the Navajo reservation and about 5 from the Zuni reservation.
Wow.
Little tiny Mormon settlement in the top of the mountains, beautiful ranching community. So of course, my grandfather owned a ranch. My dad was a school teacher and coach. So those were what I grew up doing, ranching and playing sports.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So what do you do for work?
I am a 7th grade science teacher right now. I must be completely crazy or something. That's what most people think. But I love teaching science. I think coming from a kind of an agriculture background, that was probably my first love. And then I somehow got into teaching science. But so I'm a perpetual learner of all kinds.
Have you taught other than science, or you just pretty much, that's just your subject that you love?
I have taught agriculture, so I've taught everything from horticulture, business or ag business, welding, and animal sciences, and I taught at the college science for teachers, teaching science for teachers. I guess it all just kind of goes together.
So science for teachers. What is teaching science for teachers? Tell us about that.
Teaching people how to make science fun. A lot of people that took that class, they would come in and they were either like science or they didn't, and they saved it for their last class to take before they graduated or got their associates or whatever. And by the end, they're having a ball. So making science fun, teaching them, giving them tools so that they can be successful in the classroom.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So I take it you grew up in the church?
I did grow up in the church. Both of my parents were members of the church, my grandparents on both sides that I know of. There's some strange things back in there that I don't have all the answers to, like when my father went on his mission and got his own endowments, his parents didn't go with him.
Oh,
You
interesting.
know? So, and then like my grandfather, he grew up, I don't know exactly, but he was smoking when my grandmother and he met my grandmother, and decided to get away from that somehow, and later becomes the patriarch, you know, a bishop and a patriarch. So there's history, there's struggle, I think, for my dad. I saw somebody continually try. He was imperfect and he continued to try to make his life better, to repent, to continue to love. That's kind of where I come from. It's just that genuine place of compassion that I don't see some other places, even in the church, that I was respected, I was loved, I was cared about. You know, my dad would say, I hate that word, teenager is what he would say. And I'm like, why is that? Because it's an excuse for people not to deal with people. They're just
That's
people
interesting.
that have hopes and dreams and fears. They're just like you and I, and they just needed to be talked to and cared
I
about.
like that a lot.
Well, what's interesting is, as I think a lot of members of the church, it's very interesting because when you look at like the word of wisdom, like a lot of people like read their family history and they don't realize that the word of wisdom was really kind of a recommendation back in the day. Like it was like, hey guys, here's this health code, but they didn't come out and say everybody stop tomorrow, and if you keep doing it, you're a sinner. Because it was more, the Lord allowed the members of the church generationally to kind of move away from those things. It was really interesting because even Brigham Young got up in conference in like the late 1840s and said, I've finally given up tea. And there were spittoons in General Conference back in the day when they first got to Salt Lake. Like, people don't understand that. Like, and when they hear about that, they're like, it blows their mind. They're like, what? General authorities were still chewing tobacco? And it was like, because the word of wisdom hadn't been a commandment. It hadn't been like something that we had to live by. And I think when we read those histories, I think it's really hard. We have to make sure we don't have that disconnect. Even our family members, our grandparents and our great-grandparents still struggled with that stuff because it wasn't quite like a commandment. And so I think as members of the church, we have to kind of understand the history and what they struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you grow up in New Mexico like all your life? Have you moved anywhere else? Have you branched out or?
I grew up in New Mexico till I was 18 and went off to college. I went to Utah State. I was an Aggie and was there for 4 years, moved back to New Mexico, a little place called Peru. Yeah, you heard me correct, like Peru, I drove through it. It was a reservation school. I taught there for a couple of years, got married, moved to Gallup, New Mexico on Route 66 and was there 10 and a half years or so before I divorced. And then I moved to Arizona. I was up in the White Mountains area for about 5 years, remarried, was married about 3 years and moved down to Safford, Arizona. And I've been here for about 5 years, going on 6 years this August. So
Nice. How long were you married the first time?
that 10, 11 years-ish, whatever it was. Yeah, something like that.
Okay. How many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. Girls on the ends. The boys are completely different. The girls are completely different. New sets of challenges every day. The oldest is 20. The youngest is 9. Or no, that's a lie. She is 12, going on 13.
Wow.
Wow. That's
Nice.
cool.
So the first time you got married, you were married for 10 years.
Yes, sir.
And then second time,
About 3 years, yeah.
about 3 years. And so you've been single for about how long?
Since 2017.
That's not far. That's not long.
No, I guess
I've been
not.
divorced since 2015 or 2014. Well, I guess
2014.
December 2014, so almost 2015, but
2011. Wait, it's
Who's
not a
counting?
competition.
Who's counting?
I was gonna say Terry was like next, right? To be
Maybe
like,
it is.
well,
I'm like
Like a competition.
2006.
2006. Yeah. Wow, you beat us.
It's funny.
Well,
you guys are
I mean,
all in
technically-
order on my Zoom screen, like from the least amount of time to the most. It's amazing. Yeah.
It's funny.
that's pretty awesome. All right, so you grew up. So now you're in Arizona. You were married a couple of times. So what is it what are you looking for? Are you looking to get married again? Are you looking to settle down with somebody, or are you kind of like, I'm not doing this again?
No, I feel like that I could do it again
Yeah.
and very easily do it again tomorrow, if that makes sense. If I didn't have kids. I feel like my kids have been run through the ringer
Oh yeah.
with 2 divorces, and then their dad just recently divorced in June, and that brought up all kinds of triggers for the kids that probably were there to begin with. But I don't want to be alone forever. I would rather be married. That was way more fun,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
True. But it's always a
It's
scary
been so long for
proposition.
me.
What was that, Terry?
I said, I don't know. It's been so long for me.
I think Terry's set in her ways now. She's like, I can't bring a man into my life.
I'm like, who moved my cheese?
Yeah, like I've got my favorite shows. I've got my favorite.
I don't even watch TV, Corey.
Of how Skippy in the chat is like, being alone is the best. Jokae is like, I disagree.
I disagree. I disagree 100%. There was a lot of security. I don't know, just calm that came with being married, even in times when it was rough and things weren't perfect. It was still way better.
Yeah. You said that
Yeah.
it was hard, kind of hard. Your kids went through the ringer with 2 divorces. How old was your oldest when you divorced the first time?
So she would have been about 10,
Wow.
and the youngest was 1.5 years, 2 years old, somewhere there. So I, in my second marriage, had 4 stepchildren. So I went from 4 to 8. My mother had 8 children. I got that many instantly. I thought she was completely crazy. So they had to deal with my new spouse. They had to deal with stepkids that weren't completely honest in all the things that they did, and they'd had a rough life, so no judgment there. And then their dad, of course, remarried, and there was 5 other children. They felt like they weren't cared about by that other step parent. Things were said, kids were hit. I don't know. Wasn't a good
rough.
situation.
So basically like a lot of dysfunctional American families is kind of what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, isn't that normal?
That seems pretty, I know, the more people I talk to, the more I'm like, there's a lot of dysfunction around.
Yeah, so we just got to figure out how to deal with it, right? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And help kids build, have tools to deal with it, right? It's tough. How did it go for you though? Like when you got divorced?
My first divorce, I think I grieved way too long. I was sitting in church one time. This man had lost his wife to a bear attack, and I'd gone to the funeral, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, divorce is like a death, except nobody brings flowers, nobody sends you a sympathy card, nobody brings a meal, nobody checks in on you.
That is so true.
Yeah,
you
it really
grieve
is.
alone.
Members of the
So-
church don't know how to handle divorce. It really don't.
Well, I think a lot of people just in general don't know how to handle divorce because it's it's like kind of on the one hand, it's happening all the time all over, right? And so there's a way in which people are like, oh, but that just happens to everybody. There's a way in which I think it's also hard for people to empathize with that is different with death. Like, I think everyone can imagine, oh, like, how would I feel if my spouse or my child or whoever like died, like how would I feel? Where I think it's really hard for people to put themselves in this situation, especially if they have a healthy marriage or a good measured marriage, to be like, oh, well, how would I feel if I found out tomorrow that my husband or wife is doing X, Y, and Z? Or how would I feel if they beat up on me? Or how would I feel if like I had to leave them for whatever? I think that's just a harder headspace for people to get into.
I think for me, like when I first got divorced, I wanted the divorce. I was totally the one that actually did all the paperwork and did all the work with that. But at the end, that was probably like the loneliest I had ever felt in my entire life, because nobody really knew what to say to me, how to approach me. And I'll never forget the one time I was leaving church and I had my daughter at the time. She was very little, and I was holding her hand, and the sister came up to me and just kind of tapped me on the shoulder, and she's like, "You'll be married off in no time. Don't worry about it. This is a temporary situation." And I was thinking to myself, I don't want to be married right now, because I want to figure out what I did to contribute to this, because it's two people. And I also wanted to be able to bring my kids in and help them heal. Well, yeah, it was in 2006. Here I am.
Yeah.
You're still growing, Sarah. You're still growing.
Right.
Well, and it's also one of those things where there's so much unknown, right? Like because like one of the things of the topic is like vulnerability and trust, right? But there's always an element of like, it's kind of a crapshoot. Like there's no guarantee that any of us here are going to find someone, right? And I mean, I have a friend who's always like, oh, if you just moved to Utah, I feel like you'd find someone. And I'm like, well, maybe not, but there's no guarantee. And then even if you do find some, there's no guarantee that they're not going to stay the same person, right? Like none of us are going to stay the same people. And so then there's this like growing and changing that you have to do together. And so it's just, there's always an element of chance that's like super scary, but I think also difficult for people to comprehend when they're not in a situation of having to deal with being single or having to deal with leaving a relationship or being left by someone, right?
Right. And even people they have the best intentions, the best heart, they love you the most, they say some of the things that are the most hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
And it would put me into this, I would say a hurricane, this roundabout storm that I had to go around in my head. And then I got to find the Lord somewhere down here at the bottom, and he brings me to peace. But, he was, oh, you're better off without him anyway. What? I feel that way.
Yeah. Or the grief. I mean, that's a real grief. Like even if you're better off after, you still have to grieve, right? So yeah, for sure.
Well, and I think sometimes too, people want to be supportive and they have your best interests at heart, but sometimes
Absolutely.
they just don't really quite know what to say. And so then they just overachieve with their words, and you're like going, what was that? Which is totally fine. But at the same time, you just kind of have to, just pick and choose out all that garbage.
Yeah.
I feel
guilty.
Go ahead, Corey.
Oh no, I was gonna say I felt guilty, even though I'm the one who filed for divorce, and I wanted to get out of a really bad relationship, because it was really a one-way relationship. I was the adult in the relationship, and it was like I had two boys, and it was like having a daughter. It was just, and she was a handful. Like my ex was just a handful, and very immature, very incapable of a healthy relationship, and then of course all the other hurtful things that she did to cause the divorce. And I still feel kind of guilty, like maybe I should have tried to make it work. Maybe I should be more of a forgiving person. I am a Christian. Why don't I forgive her for all her faults and all of her mistakes? And, you know,
Lost your sound, Corey.
That was totally my fault because I was trying to admit someone and I did it like a split
somebody
second too
muted
late.
me.
Sorry,
That's
Corey,
okay.
go ahead. I'll mute myself.
Okay.
You can get me back
Yeah,
up.
no worries. No, so I just felt like, man, I'm a Christian. I should be able to be forgiving. I should be able to make this work. I should stick it out. But when I prayed about it, you know, and you think the Lord, everybody always says, well, the Lord will never condone or encourage you to get a divorce. And I don't believe that that's true. I think that if he thinks you're in a really bad relationship and he thinks that you're suffering, I think that he thinks it's probably the best for you. He's probably not happy that there's a divorce and we still have our free agency, but he's not going to have us continue to suffer with somebody else is making poor choices, if that makes any sense. At least that's my personal opinion, not gospel. So don't take that to the bank and say, Bishop, Corey said this. It's true. This is my opinion.
We'll just take it to Relief Society.
It's okay. Bishops can only have opinions about divorce anyway, right? They can't like give you any. So there's no,
True.
you're all
true.
good.
I'm not giving advice anymore.
I
Yeah.
want to get emails later on like you're preaching false doctrine.
Well, in
Oh my God.
hindsight, I think there are reasons that I needed to leave or that we got divorced because I didn't leave. But I didn't think about those till a couple years ago. One of them would be like I was not being listened to. My voice was being squelched. I kind of was an extrovert and now I was more of an introvert and losing my self-worth and my voice. I have things to say. They're not always great, but everybody should be able to do that. But that didn't occur to me till a couple of years ago.
When you got divorced, did you go and seek like counseling or therapy, or did you just kind of work out the issues on your own? How did you take care of yourself after your divorce?
I started because of an addiction in our marriage. I started going to the addiction support groups for families and then eventually counseling. I went to the support groups for probably over 5 years, which I love. A lot of women don't seem like they have that same experience in there. And I think it's because they choose not to look at themselves as part of the problem. Not that addiction is their problem, but with addictive behaviors, sometimes we become codependent or more sabotaging or whatever, right? It happens. And so, yes, I have been to probably 3 or 4 different counselors over the last 10 years.
That's
So-
good though.
Yeah, that is.
That is good.
Yeah, I went to counseling too because there's a lot of stuff that was messed up in my head, and I had a lot of self-talk that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coping mechanisms I did for 22 years of, you know, getting crushed by somebody who was like mentally and verbally abusive. So if I could preempt it by already telling myself I'm a loser, then, you know, when my loving wife would tell me I'm a loser, it's like, yeah, I already know. So it wasn't as painful. But then it was something that carried on, and you know, you just end up walking around the world going, yep, I'm ugly, I'm a loser, yep, you know, who's gonna ever want me? But that was the programming from her, because she knew that the situation in our marriage wasn't good. But how do you keep me in the relationship? Well, make me think like you can't get anything better. Like, you know, who's gonna want you? You're a loser, right? And so that self-talk, it took therapy to kind of get that stuff that I guess it's like brainwashing, you know, get that stuff kind of out of my head and
Yeah.
believe that I'm not a loser, I'm not ugly, and I'm not, you know, those kinds of things. And so selfish and whatever it is I was being told.
I mean, it's gaslighting, right? Like gaslighting is any time that somebody is trying to make you believe some reality that's like not real, right? Some other reality, whether about yourself or about the relationship or about them or anything, right? And it's hard to pull out of that like on your own. I think it helps to have somebody who has no skin in the game, right? Of your life, your relationships, but who cares about your mental well-being to like help navigate that stuff.
I agree.
Well, and it can take years to just, like Corey said, I mean, it takes a while to like unprogram your thinking in that. And a lot of people sometimes they don't seek that help or that guidance. And then they go into the next thing and they just carry over these traits from one after another. And they don't become part of the solution, they become part of the problem. And it's just trying to get yourself back on track and just say, yeah, no, this isn't that, why should I trust what that person said, even though they were your spouse? You have to do that for yourself. That's probably why long after I got divorced.
Yeah, it's a battle. I mean, because I've gotten a handle on the self-talk thing, because I catch myself once in a while. I'll get a little self-conscious if somebody, like if a woman talks to me, I'll get self-conscious and I'll just start coaching myself like, she's not interested in you, or don't think that way, Corey, come on. And I start doing that crap again, and I'm like, why am I going back to those old habits of, negative self-talk? But, and sometimes I've caught myself meeting like really cool people, like, spending time talking to somebody on the phone and then going, wow, this person is so amazing. Why would I ever bring them into my broken life? So, and the self-talk starts again. You're like, I'm so broken.
Yeah.
Why would I ever subject this poor person in my life? And then you have to go, why am I doing this again? The self-talk is horrible.
And that also kind of trickles into self-worth as well, which I'm sure we'll cover in a different podcast, but it's all related. And so I just think that like, when you go through those, trials, it's so helpful to have a different perspective that's not directly in the situation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, family can't really help you out.
Yeah,
My
true.
family didn't.
And it's also protective, right? I think that's something that we don't recognize a lot, is that even when we have some of the negative self-talk or something, there's an element of like familiarity and ways in which it's protecting, like you're trying to protect yourself, which can be a good way to kind of be like, oh, thanks thoughts. Now I'm gonna move on. Like think the real things, right? Like thanks for trying to protect me from being hurt again or whatever. So
yeah.
I'll be fine today.
Sometimes too, they just don't really know what to say. Like, I know I keep saying this, but really people just don't really quite know what to tell you or what to say. And you're like, just listen. That's all I need is just somebody to listen.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I've had to train people to how to talk to me about my divorce. And the idea that I came up with a couple of years ago was talk about them like they're my dead relative and they've just died.
Yeah.
You're not going to go tell horrible things about that person that has died. You're going to tell me stories about them, memories. But if I need to vent about them, you just listen.
Yeah.
And I think that translates over into like a marriage relationship as well. Like I get to complain about my relatives, you get to complain about yours, but we don't get to complain about each other's.
See, mine was, I was always afraid to say something that my kids could hear or could get back to my kids, because I wanted my kids to be able to make their own opinion. And they did. When they got older, they made their own opinion, but I still reminded them, that's your dad. So.
Yeah, that's important, because my sons have been struggling lately, because during my relationship, I kind of shielded them from all the craziness that was my ex, and after the divorce, and they're growing up, they're in their 20s, and so they've had to deal with their mom on their own, and it has really taken a toll on them. I mean, it really has taken a toll on them. And my youngest son really struggled because he lived with his mom for about a year when he got off his mission. I mean, he came to live with me because, long story short, I was in Mexico City for work. He was on his mission in Mexico City. It just happened to be the same place. We were both going to Mexico City, but after he finished his mission, he lived with me for about 6 months down there. But then he had to get to school, and he went to school with his, did live with his mom while he was in school. And that 1 year that he was with her, man, it really affected him. And I had to get him moved out. He moved in with his brother. They're in an apartment together, but he had never experienced that before. He had never experienced the wild rages, like the adoration 1 minute and then the raging anger the next, and he never had to deal with that. And I felt really bad that I shielded them from that, but and he had to deal with that for a year. But what do you do when you're a parent and you have small kids? Like, you don't want your kids to suffer through that. It's a tough thing.
How do you handle visitation with your kids?
Their dad has always had access to him whenever he needed or wanted. We did move, and so it was twice a month. There was a time when he was remarried, and I think to save face or whatever, trying to make things work, he reduced that to once a month. And I think that he would come no matter what. So I think there had to have been something else going on there. He just recently moved to Stafford. And so without even going to the courts or doing any paperwork, it's turned into almost a 50-50 kind of, where he has them after work 2 or 3 days a week, plus, his regular weekends and stuff. So pretty amicable. We didn't get lawyers when we got divorced. We kind of wrote out the papers. So there's some hard things in there because we didn't, put dates on certain things. So over Christmas break, I wrote up an order to have child support reduced because there's no time for that to end for him. But I went ahead, and it's just the right thing to do, I think.
Yeah. So how do you guys, when he was living away, I'm just kind of curious because I was kind of in the same situation where when I was living in California, I had to transport my kids. So how did you work out transportation, the cost of transportation with your kids? How did you work that out?
We always tried to meet in the middle, wherever that was. And sometimes for me, that was more miles than it was for him, but time-wise, it was about the same. So I don't know. I didn't know how to be divorced. I say the Lord had to teach me in every little instance how to handle that, because 30 miles another direction, my direction should have been halfway, but time-wise, it wasn't. So I gave that.
So let me kind of shift over a little bit to the topic at hand. So what was it that caused you to kind of have a lack of trust? Like, what is it that you don't trust about relationships? What was it that kind of did it for you?
I would say that I compromised myself. I compromised my individuality away for his needs. Does that make sense? Even my mental health, I would say. So for me, my life's pursuit is to figure out boundaries, appropriate boundaries, correct?
Yeah.
So once trust is broken, I feel like there should be a way that people can earn trust back. And that's been a struggle for me to figure out. These are their efforts, right? That's got to mean something to me, or it doesn't. So what means something to me, I don't know. It's kind of been a struggle to figure out, okay, this action should rebuild trust in this person. And it can. I should let it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard finding that line between like of learning appropriate trust, right? And what actually is earning trust versus like what is our individual willingness to want to trust people or not want to trust people, right? That's a hard space to navigate for sure.
It is.
I know for me, I was cheated on multiple times in my marriage. And I mean, to the point where I just became very like, whatever, here we go again. I'm very upfront with people and I tell them that, but I don't hold that. Each person is individual and I do not carry that to that person. And I figure, well, I mean, if I can't trust you, you've proven that I can't trust you. So how do you approach those situations, knowing that you've had trust issues in the past?
Well, when I started, I was doing the support group, and I was learning about boundaries and reading books, and probably that book about not marrying a jerk, and there's another one on boundaries. And so of course I'm praying about it, and the Lord's like, yeah, I'm going to give you some opportunities to practice this for real, right? And so one day I'm driving around a new town that I don't know very well, and I don't know the streets, and something comes through on my text, and I'm driving, so I don't even notice, and then this my friend's husband calls me, and I'm like, he never calls me. What's going on here? And he says, I just sent you a text, and it was meant for my wife. Will you delete it? And I says, oh, okay, sure, no problem. But I'm driving, I think nothing of it. I get home and I realize that that wasn't meant for his wife. That was meant for a girlfriend or something of the like, right? This was a struggle for me. And eventually I called him up and I says, hey, when you called me and I said that I would delete this, I didn't know what the contents of this text were. And I think it's dishonest of you to ask me to not tell your wife. I feel like it's wrong, and you have now broken my trust.
That's rough because
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to trust men again, and then you meet here's another man doing this thing. It's like, it's hard. I can see what you probably. It's easy for a woman to think like, oh, see, all men are dogs. All men do that. All men are cheaters.
So this was hard. This was really hard. And so I said, okay, in order for you to rebuild trust with me, has nothing to do with his wife yet, right? In order for you to rebuild trust with me, you've broken my trust. I'm not talking about anybody else's. You need to go tell your wife, and she needs to come talk to me so that I know that happened. He's like, oh, I don't know. I don't think I can do that. That would be too hard. I'm like, okay, so how long do you need? Oh, I don't know. I can't. I says, okay, 36 hours, 48 hours, what? I don't think he just kept backpedaling. I said, okay, you got 24 hours. That's the way that you start to rebuild trust. And so that happened. And his wife came and talked to me, and the contents of the text were shared. The text was deleted, and she immediately kicked him out of the house, and he was out of the house for at least a week. I think there was a rocky path still for them, but 6, 7, 8 years later, they're still together.
They worked it out.
Our relationship, yeah, my relationship with the man, it's kind of awkward for a while, at gatherings and social things, right? But it was always pleasant until the last year or so. It's become it's not as strained. So over time, that trust has been able to be rebuilt with me, and hopefully with his wife as well.
Yeah.
So you believe that it's possible to build that trust again in other people, right? Like, I mean,
I
there's
do,
a lot of
absolutely.
people out there who've been cheated on. I think a lot of people in the group. There's quite a few people in the group that probably. And I think the big thing in the church about marriage, like about divorce in the church, probably a lot of it has to do with. I mean, we try really hard marriages in the church. We really do try to make it work. And that was like the straw that broke my back. Like it was, I was in a really volatile, difficult marriage. But you add the cheating in there, it's like, oh, what is the, like, what is this? Isn't even worth the fight. Like I'm fighting so hard for 22 years to keep a marriage together, and then I find out there was all this cheating going on that I didn't even know about until later, and it's like, wow, like how do you, and then you just feel like all this fight. Now I'm older, and I'm back to the single life, and I didn't want to be single. I wanted to be married and grow old, do the whole grandpa grandma thing and have Christmases and all that kind of stuff. I had all those beautiful ideas, and then it all goes out the window. So I don't know.
Well, you can't rebuild trust with someone who's not willing either.
Yeah, exactly.
Someone has to be willing to fight the fight, the good fight, and keep going. And the only
they
way
have to be willing to change their behaviors in ways that are transparent for the other person. Like they have to be willing to put in that extra work that rebuilding trust requires, right? Like it doesn't require going back to a status quo, right? It requires that there be more transparency, greater effort.
Yeah. Well, then, so the question is, like, I know there was a question in the chat that like, what's the difference between forgiveness and trust? So I'll throw that to the group.
completely different.
They're totally different. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Go ahead, Jokae. What do you think?
Forgiveness, I think, is for me, so that I can move on. And if it helps them, hallelujah, right? Two birds, one stone. But in order for me to move on and not be bitter and mess up the parenting, co-parenting stuff, I've got to forgive. Trust, totally different.
Yeah, that's true.
I can forgive without trust. I can trust without forgiveness, but completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think forgiveness is key. I think it's key for healing in our lives. And one thing that I realized that I think one positive, there was a few positives, I guess, out of my divorce. And one big positive for me was a better understanding of the atonement of Jesus Christ, because, we kind of grow up thinking the atonement is all about, sin, he suffered for all of our sins in the garden, right? But I think what we miss is that he suffered for all, not just for sins, but he suffered for all suffering. And then when I realized that he suffered, he knows what I felt like when I was hearing when I was hearing general authorities or people in the scriptures say that the Lord knows our suffering. I always in my mind thought, oh, he knows my sins, like he knows what it feels like to sin and suffer from sin. But what I found during the process I went through is that he suffered what the victims of sin suffered. Mm-hmm. He knew what I was going through. He knew the pain I was suffering, the breakup of my family, the bad news about all the cheating, the lying, and he knew how to kind of suckle that, how to soften that in me. And when I started praying in my prayers at night, I asked for the atonement to come into my life as a victim, like for that suffering, if that makes any sense. And the minute I started changing my prayers to that, and then that helped me start to pray for my ex, and I started asking for him to forgive her. And that was that wasn't such a hard thing. In the beginning it was. I'm like, I have to forgive her, and I was just so upset about everything. But once I started to ask for him to console me, then it became easy for me to ask on her behalf to forgive her, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something else I thought of this because of David's comment in the chat about his ex, which is, I think, brings up a really good point that, like, forgiveness is, as Jokae said, like it's about us, right? But it also doesn't mean that like you can forgive someone without making yourself or people you love vulnerable to someone who's dangerous. And I think that that's always something that's like really important, is that like we don't have to extend an olive branch to retrust someone who has done something that requires certain consequences, right? And if they're a dangerous person to our kids or to us, then for me, like there are certain things that are, and for most people, even legally, right? There are certain things that are just deal breakers that like you have to say, I'm sorry, but your choice made it so that I can't trust you in this situation of a relationship with me or with the kids or whatever again, right? But you can still forgive them, and you can forgive them regardless of anything that they do to deserve it or earn it, right? Like they might never apologize, and you could still forgive them and feel at peace and feel not resentful and kind of feel free of that burden, that Corey was talking about in terms of turning to the savior as like a victim. And I think that's always really important to bring up with forgiveness, because I think some people can get caught sometimes in the view of like, oh, well, to forgive means that I'm going to treat them the same way I did before. And it's like, no, you could treat them in a loving way, but having those healthy boundaries, which like Jokae earlier was talking about, learning how to have healthy boundaries is really, really important, and sometimes like really necessary to keep yourself safe.
Well, and that's the other thing too. I was going to actually bring that up, Monica, when you were talking about, the forgiveness and stuff. I think it's very important to forgive us for our role in the situation and forgive them for their role in the situation, but also being able to, like you said, establish those healthy boundaries where you're just like, I'm not going to put myself in that situation again. It just wasn't good for me. And I don't like the way I feel in that situation. And it's very much a balance. You have to find that balance within yourself. I mean, rescue people, you can't do that if you're at stake, so.
Yeah, that's tough.
I agree. One thing that I thought about forgiveness that I didn't understand to begin with, I know it would take a while, right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
But I didn't think that there would be new things to forgive him for. And some of the things showed up after my dad died. I think when he left, I'm like, okay, my dad's here. I got the priesthood. I'm good. I've got that support. Then when dad dies, oh man, where is that? Where is the person who I was supposed to be able to lean on when my dad died? And so new things showed up, and I keep finding myself over time having to forgive again or for a new thing. And I didn't think that would happen. I think, I could forgive him and I'm done. I'm happy. Life goes on. But I think with this kind of person in your life, there's just going to be some things that show up. I would say even with married people, right? We're just going to hurt each other. Wrong or right, you burnt the food or, you kicked the dog, I don't know. But there are things to be forgiven for all the time. And it's a life's work to just continue to try and do that. Forgive each person that hurts us.
And to I don't know, expect, the best intentions, I think, is like give the benefit of the doubt in most situations, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You don't want to instantly just think that somebody's up to no good or they have bad intentions. You definitely want to see the good in everybody. At the same point, though, you need to be like, well, this keeps happening. So at what point is this, not such a great thing for me?
Yes, absolutely.
And learning to recognize when behaviors are red flags, are troublesome, are unusual, versus when a behavior just reminds you of something that someone else did in the past, when it's not troublesome, it just reminds you of someone that you have a complicated relationship with, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's the key, and that was where therapy comes in. I remember the therapist telling me some really good advice. She had said that because I was so used to one type of woman, for 22 years of marriage, she said that, you're always used to these highs and lows and these like extreme behaviors at both ends. That she said, when you meet a woman who's normal, she's to me. This is what she said to me. So when you meet a woman who's normal, in your mind, you're gonna think she's boring. And I had to remember that, like, because I was always I mean, if you ever see the TV series like Modern Family, the Colombian wife, she's kind of like exciting and extravagant. She's just extravagant and she's always kind of like crazy sometimes. Like, well, that was kind of like my ex, and so the therapist was like, yeah, you don't want to be in that type of relationship again. So when you meet somebody who's not all over the place like that and not all animated, then that person's normal and that's who you should probably date. So it was very interesting advice, but I think you're right. Like, you can't, but I can't also dismiss women who might just have a bad day or, just might be having, a moment. And I can't be like, oh no, she's a crazy one, I got to run away. So I think you're right, Monica. I think we have to make sure we don't just, we think we see a red flag, but it's just a normal out of bounds behavior.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
also think people have patterns as well, and it's behavioral patterns. There's just patterns, and if they go outside of that pattern, then you can be like, okay, that's kind of a bad day. But when they start kind of doing things and it's just common, you have to think, this isn't good for me. So yeah, I do believe in giving credit where credit is due. But at the same time, I think that keeping your eyes open and just kind of realizing, is this like crazy or is this not crazy? So.
Yeah, for sure. And like, okay, so you mentioned boundaries, right? Like, I would love to hear more about like what you feel like you've learned or been learning in terms of boundary setting, because this is something that I struggle with a lot. And usually I tend to veer more on the part of like, I'll give this person another chance, or they're kind of saying things that make like feel off, but maybe not, right? And it always kind of turns out that like, oh yeah, it probably wasn't, it probably was off. Like, I probably should have trusted my intuition. But I'd love to like hear like what, I don't know, what you feel like you're learning, what you feel like you still need to learn, kind of how you're approaching the process, right? Because I think it's really hard to learn how to set healthy boundaries when you've been in situations like a lot of us have where we've been wronged in some way, or something's gone on.
I think that it's hard to set boundaries, and when we start to do it, we need people to check some of those things, to bounce them off of. Is this a good boundary or not? Does this help rebuild trust? Is this okay? Because we don't know how to do that. We haven't been taught. We don't have the skills. This last week in a training for professional development, we talked about creating a social contract. How do you want to be treated? How do I want to be treated? If this happens, what is this, and creating a contract that allows us to be safe. Yeah, I could have gone back into my second marriage, because there was a point where he said, what is it going to take for us to move back in with each other? You need to get help. And to me, that can look like 15 different ways, right? You can go to counseling, you can go to a support group, you can, I would say, journaling and going to church, but you've got to have a plan.
Yeah.
Of some kind, and agree to it. I was willing to move back in tomorrow, right? But with only a plan.
Yeah.
But when there could be when there's no way to do that, you just decided for us. And that's what a boundary is. This is what will keep me safe.
Yep.
And in this training I just went to this last week, as a teacher, they say you select the consequences, because that's life. In a job,
and then hold to the consequences, right?
So if the consequences, you get a timeout, or consequences you get ISS, or consequences you don't get to participate in the next activity, whatever it is, you make the consequence, and you have to stick to it. So if he I don't know. Trying to come up with an example off the top of my head.
Well, I like how you talk about it being one conversation, right? A conversation and kind of contractual, but I think clearly like communicating things to someone. And I know for me, it's almost always holding to the consequences. So this isn't a relationship with a person, but it's a good example that I have because it's such a long-standing relationship, right? It's my relationship with my mom. And so where I've had times with her where I've said, hey, I will not talk to you. Like I will not engage if you're going to bash my siblings, my dad, if you're going to bash me, like those are limits for me. And then, but there have been so many times where she starts to do that and I don't hang up the phone, right? Like I don't hold to the boundary. And so that's something that I think a lot about in terms of building relationships with, people I want to date.
And I've done that, if someone is shaming or blaming, I walk out of that situation right now.
Yeah,
That's important.
It's really important. And I've also noticed like times, I think one thing for me, which I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes I'll set a boundary and immediately see someone, and it's a small boundary, right? It's not even a big boundary, but like when I see someone pushing up against that to see what the give is in the boundary, then immediately I'm like, this is someone who isn't respecting my boundaries. And this is something small that I asked for, right?
And let me see if I can find it here real quick. Because
while you're looking at that,
supplies.
Jokae, while you're looking at that, so I'm listening to the conversation, and I know Monica kind of brought up family, and for me, I know I have family members that I literally cannot trust as far as I can throw them. My brother's been in and out of jail, and he just has led a very hard, rough life. And I just can't trust him. I can love him for who and what he is capable of loving himself. I mean, I can't do everything for him. But there comes a point in time where when you're faced with this whole trust and the whole boundary thing, when it's family, it's a little bit trickier because you can't really escape family. And you can't avoid them, but how long can you avoid them? So it's hard because when I'm faced with these individuals and I'm in the same room with them, I just think, well, how can I provide them with no judgment, love, but at the same time, be able to establish boundaries for myself, for self-love for myself. And it's really, really hard thing. So I'm just curious what everyone's thoughts are in that perspective with family instead of people that we've been involved with.
That's a good one, Terry, because I'm in the same boat. Like I have a younger sister who's been just a disaster. I mean, she, opiate addictions, and then, calling for money all the time, giving me the sad story when I know she's probably going to use the money for, buying painkillers or whatever she's going to buy. But giving me the whole, like, it's cold outside, I'm sleeping in my car, can you please help me with a $40 or $100 or whatever. And that's tough because it just pulls on my heartstrings, and and people are yelling at me, don't do it, Corey, don't do it, you're enabling her. And I'm like, yeah, but, what if she really is hungry? What if she really needs the money? And because I would do that and I'd feel guilty, and then I would find out that she would use the money for other than what she said she was going to use it for, it would just upset me. And so now I don't really have contact with her, and I feel really bad because she's still working on herself, but she texts me, and I give her like, just, I'm glad you're doing well. And I don't try to engage. I don't try to, and it's hard, but it's been years and years and years since my sister and I, had a relationship just because of that. And just constantly trust being broken.
Yeah, you can't really have a normal relationship at that point.
Right.
You just have to kind of have one arm out all the time and just say, look, I care about you, you're my sibling, or I care about you, you're my family. But at the same time, I can't just keep doing this because it's hurting you and me at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's a really tricky thing. And like, I don't know, my brother died at the beginning of March, or at the end of March. And like, and he took his own life, which I talked a little bit about before. But it was one of those situations where it was very similar, like for years and years, where he was kind of like, hey, I'm struggling. Like he would ask for help from family members, and it just like pulls on your heartstrings. And at the same time, like there was nothing that he ever did in his behavior that indicated a true change in behavior or some kind of ways in which we could trust him. And so I eventually just got to the point where like I would talk to him and we would have conversations, or I brought him out to visit in February before he passed away. But I would just listen to him and like I wouldn't really engage much with what he was saying other than to say like, that sounds really hard. Like, I'm really sorry that you're struggling. I wish that there was something that I could do, but I can't, like just kind of just sounds really hard. And I think just listening and giving, even that was meaningful, but there's certain times at which you just can't even that level. Like I can't even do that with like my mom anymore. Right. I can't give that kind of emotional support, because then that enables her bad behavior even more. So it's a tough thing.
At this training, it said unaddressed behavior becomes accepted behavior in the lowest form and will create a culture. So for me in a classroom, I have to see these kids every day, whether I want to or not. So I have to go beyond, I can't just kick them out or create the distance, right, that I can from an adult sibling or my uncle, the same kind of situation, drinks like a fish and smokes. I don't feel comfortable there, whatever, right? I can't just create that distance. So in a classroom setting, I have to create a relationship, but we still have to be able to work together. There still has to be a consequence. So I can correct that in a safe way, right? Kind, compassionate way. What are you doing? I'm drawing. Well, what are you supposed to be doing? My work. So what do you need to be doing? Right? My work. So I trust that you're going to get started, right? Yeah. And what happens if you don't get started? Then I get a consequence. It's a system that's built in. And I think it can work. We can create this kind of social contract with anybody, our parents or a sibling or our kids. How do we be respected? What does that look like? Make a list, make a contract, and then these are the consequences. And we have to stick to it. And that's the hardest part, I think, for me is sticking to it.
Yeah. I don't know I think we can go pretty far on this subject in terms of knowledge, but I really like the idea of what you said of like culture, right? Like of thinking of relationships as culture, because I think that's really true. And culture is like the hardest thing to change, right? For people, like it's the hardest thing to change. Your family culture, your church culture, your community culture, your school culture, like whatever it is, that's tough. But I like that idea of thinking of it as culture, because it gives you something to look at rather than just saying like, okay, what kind of relationship am I building? Like what kind of family culture are we creating together? And is that the culture? Is that the type of culture that I want, right, to be engaged in? Is that the kind of culture that I want to pass to my kids? I really like that idea. I was like, especially I think with family, it just struck me as like, oh yeah, family culture is a really good way of thinking about all of those relationships.
And the other thing too is I think it's easier, like for us as parents raising our kids, right, to allow the consequences to happen to our own children and have them suffer those consequences. But when we're on the other side of that, and it's a family member, a sibling, or it can be, an aunt or an uncle or
a parent.
Yeah, or a parent.
Or
It's hard for us because like, how do you allow those consequences to happen? Like you can't just sit there and say, well, if you say this to me one more time, I'm not going to talk to you for a year, because then you become part of the problem and you haven't really established a solution. And so for me, sometimes I find just saying, hey, no, you can't manipulate me that way. I know you don't view it this way, but you are actually manipulating when you say it that way. Is that what your intention was? And
right.
That itself gets this instant, like it just stops them dead in their track. And then they automatically are like, well, no, I wasn't manipulating. I was, okay, well then tell me what you were trying to do, because you were manipulating me. So I think that it's hard. It's such a gear shifter, because it's like you've got your kids on one end, you've got your family on another, and then you've got a potential spouse or boyfriend or, you know, whatever on the other end of it. And it's just, you have to approach every situation so differently. Just like you with your students, you have to approach that differently because they are learning. So how are
I
you
want them to learn.
Right. So how are you able to shift gears in that manner, and how are you able to approach those situations differently?
I think I have to think about every relationship as I have an ability to create what I want. And it all starts in conversation. All starts in conversation. I was thinking about the Doctrine and Covenants last week's lesson when the saints moved to Ohio, right? And they got there and it wasn't what they were used to. There wasn't the shops and the nice houses and the nice streets or whatever it was, right? And they were a little bit upset about this being Zion and there not being anything there, right? Whether that's a marriage relationship or the saints going to Ohio or my classroom. The Lord wants me to create Zion. He wants me to create a culture in my classroom, a culture in my marriage that helps me be successful. He's going to give me all kinds of tools, but he doesn't care if I do it this way or that way. It mattereth not. Okay. But that's the struggle. What do I want? I have to be intentional, like you said, right? I have to say, this is what I want it to look like. How do I get there? And once I say, I'm done with the default, because every day I just go down the street, and if I don't have an intention, I end up wherever I end up. So what kind of culture do I want to create?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the vulnerability that's important, because I think that's the hardest part for me is to become vulnerable, want to become vulnerable. And I don't know if it's a guy thing or what, because, guys are raised to suffer in silence and, not complain. And so, like you said, speak up when you feel like you're being taken advantage of, right? And, or like what Terry said, like, hey, I don't really like the way you're saying that. Is there a different way you can say that? But if that's the way you're saying it, then that's not going to fly with me. Like, you're saying those boundaries. And so I think it's hard because some guys, we're just like, oh, well, suffer in silence. It is what it is.
I think sometimes too, failure to communicate can be the death of you. And I have this 24-hour rule where it's like, I can be upset with something and I can be, but I'm going to give myself 24 hours to really figure out if I am really upset or if it's just a reaction. And if I am upset about it, one, it calms me down. And two, I'm able to just say, okay, this is what I need from you. And this is what happened. And on my side of it, and what's your take on it? As long as you give the other person a chance to communicate, then you're understanding. And that's also establishing boundaries as well.
Yeah, exactly what
sure.
Terry said. I do that with emails. So, like, I can get so angry with, like, somebody's stupid email at work. And I just want to just type this, like, if you weren't such a moron. And so as a tactic, I type the email up in my drafts and I leave it for a day. And then I come back and I realize, wow, I was acting on emotion. I'm over it. And I just delete it. I'm like, I don't even send it.
That's
But
such a good strategy.
The fact that I just banged it out like, and then left for a day and came back, it was like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't send that, because now I'd be trying to like build relationships again. I was just angry.
It's kind of like, I don't know why this popped into my head, but it totally made me think of like Captain Moroni and Pahoran, right? You're just like, man, I wonder if Captain Moroni just waited to send that letter the way he wrote it, because like it's such an interesting story, right? Because the whole thing is about how he's like in the wrong, which is like not something we usually talk about with everyone, right? He's like angry because he thinks he knows what's going on, but in reality, he has no idea. And Pahoran comes back and says, hey, I get it. I understand why you're so angry. Like, let me give you all the facts. Like, you just don't understand the whole story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you can get a different perspective too when you hear that person's side. Like I've done that before. Like somebody has said something about me, and I was like, no, that's not how. Wait a minute, that is how I am. And you're just like, oh, when you read it and you hear it, you're just like, oh gosh, I feel like such a fool now. This is exactly what I do.
Well, and I love how like Pahoran is so diplomatic about it, right? Because doesn't he talk about how like, oh, I love how invested you are, right? And like how much heart you have and how much you care about the people. And like he focuses on the positive things in that interaction while also saying like, and that's not what's going on. Right? This is what's going on. And so I love that approach of being like, hey, I understand that this frustration is coming from a good place in your heart, and focusing on like the good part, and then being like, and this is how it was problematic for me, right? This is why it didn't work.
Yeah, and you definitely don't want to make the person feel like they're a problem or that they did something wrong or bad. It's just the way that they made you feel, which is, that's okay. As long as you just approach it nicely and you don't approach it, like Corey, the keyboard warrior over there. Then you're good.
Well, if somebody's asking me like personally like something about, men suffering in silence, and I just had to make a comment back to him. So that's all.
It's actually, well, this is funny though that you bring that up, Corey, because like I know for me, like in terms of parenting, like I thought a lot about, well, how do I want my kids to be, like how do I want my son to be, right, in the world? And I made a very, very conscious decision when he was very young that I was like, I'm going to make sure that he grows up understanding how to share his emotions, understanding how to share his emotional world, feeling comfortable sharing his emotional world with the people that are around him, like just trying to undo some of that like socialized stuff that we all see everywhere that's like men have to be this way. And it's like, well, why? Like Christ wasn't that way. Like we don't have to be that way. We're just told to be that way. And anyway, going back to the culture thing, right?
That's right, because Jesus wept, and he also got pretty upset when he went to the temple and saw all the money changers. So
yeah, but even what's
interesting.
Yeah, but what's even interesting about that example is that like he never hit anyone. He never like he might have turned over tables. He might have said like this isn't right. And the other thing is like he was Christ, so he was perfect, right? And he was perfect in his anger. None of us are perfect in our anger. And I think that that's always like a really important thing.
That's
to
not
like
true. I'm
present.
perfect in my anger, just saying.
Except for Terry. Terry's perfect in her anger, right? Like I think it's interesting because I hear that a lot too, right? Where it's like, well, but Christ did the money changers. I'm like, yeah, but he was the savior. Like he knew how to do that appropriately, and he knew when it was, and he knew when it was right, and how to deal with those people. And I was like, we do not know that as mortals, right? And so that's really like our anger we should always be self-reflective. Like, is this warranted? Am I expressing this the right way? After we express it, we can go back and analyze it again and say, okay, could I have done that better? Or was that okay this time? Right? Yeah. It's tough for us. It's tough for us mortals.
Yeah, I mean, especially when they were doing it in the house of the Lord, I think he wanted to get his point across. I think he wanted everybody to know in a public way that it was inappropriate what they were doing. So I don't think he was angry per se, but I think he was trying to send a message in a very public way, like this is inappropriate behavior in the temple.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So we get to the point in our conversation now where we kind of open it up to the audience. I don't know if there's questions out there, we'd like to have you chime in. So what we'll do is if you don't know how to raise your hand, you can do it one of two ways. If you have a Windows machine, you can do Alt, hold the Alt key down, and you hit the Y, and you'll see my hand goes up when I do that. If you hit it again, the hand goes down. And if you have an Apple, you do Option Y, and that will help you raise your hand up and down. And so what we allow you to do is come on. We'll come on with the camera and the mic, ask your questions. You can ask of the whole group. You can ask of the guests. And so go ahead, raise your hands, and we'll continue to discuss until we see some hands come up. But And you know, you can ask any questions you want about the topic we've been talking about. You can talk, or you can just ask general questions like, like how come my beard's white, not brown?
Well, I just got back from Hawaii a week ago. And one thing that I found in Hawaii that I really love, you guys seen the hang loose sign?
Yeah.
Chakra.
And so like say I want to cross the street and this person lets me cross the street, this car stops. And so I wave mahalo, right? Is how you say it, thank you. And then they wave back. So is that other person saying thank you? I'm saying thank you. Are they saying thank you?
I don't know, Dave. That's a good question for. We have a guy that's in Hawaii right there.
Well-
Yes, I'm listening.
Go ahead, Dave.
Hang loose sign. What is that? Is it a general hello?
Terry had it right. It's shaka, and it basically is a wave, hello or thank you. It comes from a guy who actually lost some fingers in an accident way back when, and that was how he waved. That's because he lost 3 fingers in the sugarcane
And-
days.
And here's a little fun fact. Do you know what ABC stands for? ABC stores. Don't answer, David. You know what it stands for?
Good trivia, good
Jokae?
trivia.
Somebody told me what that was and now I don't remember.
All about what?
Community.
David. Aloha brings customers.
Yep.
So I was
I should
thinking,
pay taxes in Hawaii.
well, I was thinking about it because in sign language, this motion, like if I'm going from one person to another, right, it means that they're the same, or this is the same, or that we're the same. Okay.
Well, they even do this for like aloha or like how are you, hello. Like it's just a greeting.
But
Like when
I feel like it's more than just a greeting, it's a way to create community,
Yeah.
right? Our goal is to create unity or to be the same, even with somebody that's completely different. So I'm saying thank you, and the other person's like, this is how we create the culture that we want. You need to cross. I stop my car. I say aloha and greet people in the ABC store so people will come in and buy things. But we're creating what we want.
That's cool. It's funny. We have actually some interesting, now we have some interesting comments in the chat all about the sign, which way you do it, what it actually means, or where it's
think there's-
from.
There's lots of different ways that you can do it. Sometimes it's kind of like
Yeah,
a wave,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
People do it different ways.
Or
I
just
think
a
it-
quick, hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
Up.
Well, Hawaii is my favorite place to go visit anyway. So whenever I could take a vacation, I kind of go there. Like for when I was in Mexico City for work, I was able to take R&R, and which just is a fancy term for they pay for my flight. And so they would say, "Where do you want to go in the 50 United States?" And I was like, "Hawaii."
Hawaii.
And then,
Yeah.
and then the next year it was like, "Where do you want to go?" I'm like, "Hawaii."
Although you know that like there's a huge, and this is happening in Hawaii, Utah, Colorado, like tons of people are moving there because everyone is like leaving California because they can work remotely now permanently, a lot of them. And California is super expensive and it's causing prices to go way up, including in Hawaii. I have a friend who's living in Hawaii right now and she's like, it is insane in Oahu right now.
Yeah. Plus in California, there's a lot of poop everywhere. So you gotta.
Thanks for sharing.
Did you contribute to that, Corey, or you become?
No, I did not contribute, but
Yeah, right.
my friends were telling me there's a lot of poop everywhere. So I guess the city of San Francisco has an actual poop patrol that goes out and cleans up. So yeah, it's pretty
I
bad.
used to live
Oh, it doesn't
outside
surprise
San
me.
Francisco. And when I would go there, I would just jump on a flight for the weekend and just go to Hawaii for the weekend.
Yeah, you're lucky you're on the left coast because I'm from California, so even though I'm in Virginia now, I miss being in California because I just hop on to LAX, 5-hour flight. I'm in Hawaii, hang out for a week, come back.
Well, your Hawaii is the Virgin Islands. Monica and I went there, and that was like a day trip for me. It was like a whole day traveling.
I haven't been down to the Virgin Islands. I got to get down there and check it out for the first time. But
Yeah, it's pretty great.
is it?
Yeah, she's still.
I know the
even with
Bahamas
the
are
flight
too. Are pretty
Here it
nice.
is.
Yeah, even with the flight delay, she still beat me home. Yeah.
So
It is, it's
anybody
true.
have any questions? I guess we're just gonna keep on with the topic if nobody has any questions. But I guess if we have some hands come up, we'll chime in. But we talked about some strategies that we can deal with, like the vulnerabilities. Like, we talked about setting boundaries. I think the biggest thing for me that I struggle with is, I guess, just letting my guard down, like letting the wall come down. Because I'll meet people, I'll chat with people, and I have like feelings that like I like somebody, but then I think the fear kicks in, and I start to build those walls up, like protection, right? And I know it's wrong. Come on, we all know it's wrong. It's just something we all have to deal with. But I mean, fear is a really interesting thing because I heard a song the other day. I like to listen to some Christian channels on Spotify sometimes, and there was one song that the title of the song was "Fear is a Liar," and it was kind of interesting. Like I was like listening to the lyrics, and it was like, and who's the father of all lies, And so he uses fear to keep us from being happy. And so but how do we overcome that fear? Because it's such a real thing. I mean,
Well, so the problem, Corey, is that fear is also associated with trust, right? So you have to be able to fully trust that person, not to use what you are telling them as a tool later, whether to hurt you or to use it against you or to judge you or whatever. And so they kind of go hand in hand. And if you've had that moment where you're just like, you've had your trust broken in the past because you've shared something very personal and then it's come back, yeah, you're going to be a little gun shy of that second time around. But it comes down to how well do you trust that person you're telling?
yeah,
You know?
it's such a weird feeling because there's a lot of things I'm not afraid of. I mean, I do a lot of scary things for
Right.
work, for fun, but man, I start to have feelings for somebody, and then I get all like, oh, whoa, 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 stop, time out. I gotta run. There's like a hole in the wall that's the shape of a quarry. It just ran through it.
Yeah.
Because it can be so scary, right? I mean, and it's funny because like we're all grown-ups and we've been through all of this stuff before. And I think that these are the times in which like our little inner child comes out, right? Where we want to be loved, we want to have connection, we want to be with someone who gets us, we want to get them. But it's really can be terrifying in that moment when you realize like, oh, this could turn into something. And what does that mean? Like, given that we were talking earlier about how it can be a crapshoot, right? Like, what does that mean? It's going to be a crapshoot. I might get hurt. I might be destroyed after this, but like, is it worth it? It's scary
So is
Exactly.
fair
and worthwhile.
So it sounds
Well,
like
we do have a
David has
question from David.
Yeah. So we'll get him to unmute. David, go ahead
Can you see
and
me? Okay. So just my thoughts about fear and trust. I've had 3 relationships since my divorce. I've been divorced 7 or 8 years now. And for me, it wasn't scary to trust somebody because I knew who they were and where I stood with them. The hard part for me was when that trust was broken. What do I do then? Kind of a thing. And in 2 of the instances, it's what ended not the marriage, but the relationship was breaking that trust to the degree that I just couldn't see a way forward. And so reconciling, I don't know. I think part of it is really getting to know somebody and knowing what we can handle and what we can't in a relationship is important when it comes to learning how to trust people and yeah, what do we do when that trust has been broken? So anyway.
Yeah, that's always a good question, because I think that's the topic we have for tonight is kind of like getting that trust back. Like,
Mhm.
is it possible to like get that back? Because I think a lot of it, my fear is that, like, okay, I let my heart go, really get involved with somebody, and then boom, I get crushed. Or, are they call me? Are they gonna call me in like 2 months and go, you know what, I met somebody else and I like them better, and nice knowing you, Corey. It's like, oh, I just gave up my heart and now it's crushed again. It's like,
Well,
I
and
don't
I
know.
believe that it is. It just depends on the circumstances as to whether that's going to be right for us to continue on,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
So I have a question then. Is fear good or bad?
It can
I
be
mean,
both.
it can be both. Yeah. I think there are ways in which fear protects us, right?
Mhm.
In certain circumstances when we need it. And we're built that way. But obviously we're also told like to not fear, right? And to let love kind of overpower our fear. But that's something like to get to that point, like I think sometimes we think of like trust or faith or something as being the antithesis to fear, but in the scriptures it says it's love, right? It's perfect love. And what that requires is healthy boundaries, it's getting to know someone, it's being authentic and real and hoping that that person's doing the same thing, but there's no guarantee, right? And letting that kind of overcome fear.
Well, I
Well, and
also think that
Right.
fear is a teacher. So if we're afraid, something needs to change. If somebody's screaming at us, that needs to change, right? It's making us afraid. And so I think sometimes it's if we acknowledge that, hey, I'm afraid. Why am I afraid? Is it me that needs to change? Or something in our relationship that I need to address, that I need to be vulnerable about, right, Corey? Okay. Do I need to express this vulnerability so that I can get through it? Because if I remain here, I continue to be afraid,
Yeah.
right?
One something that Elder Colin talked about, the most person that he's vulnerable with is his wife. He knows everything about her. She knows everything about him. And he said in a talk um, years ago at BYU, basically he knows the ways that would hurt her the most because she has been so vulnerable with him and he has been so vulnerable with her. They know how to hurt each other the most. And yet they trust each other and love each other so much that they are willing to be that way with that and with each other. And I think that we need to be able to get to that point where we allow ourselves to open our hearts and feel and be vulnerable, even though it's scary, even though it's hard. Obviously, having our eyes wide open, but allowing ourselves to do that.
Yeah,
Well,
for
I
sure.
think also, I'm just gonna kind of add to this a little bit. I think also understanding that there will be times of hurt and uncomfortable and just discomfort in a relationship. But as long as you can properly, effectively communicate through that and understand and get on the other side of it, then it will be okay, but you have to be able to communicate that and be able to just understand both sides and you come to a mutual understanding of each other and not doing it again. It's simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, like a lot of that is about openness and being very straightforward with each other about where you are, which I think is also scary, right? Because people are like, well, you have to play the game, you have to do this. And it's like, well, maybe to some degree at the beginning a little bit, but like mostly I think it's just better just to be real with people and to
Yeah.
say, hey, this is what I'm looking for, this is where I'm at. And then as the relationship changes, say, hey, this relationship is changing for me. Like, how are you
Yeah.
feeling? Like, I'm feeling this way. And kind of being willing to have ongoing dialogue, knowing that like that's going to be way better in the long run than, holding something out for too long because we're not willing to talk about it or we're scared that somebody's going to leave us or we're scared that we're not ready or whatever. It's just handling those things as they come up.
Yeah. Thanks, David, for jumping in. Before we get over to Heather, I have I got to bring my Star Wars nerdness out. So, Yoda said, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. So, good old Yoda. He knew fear was a thing we had to be careful of. So, all right, what happened to Heather?
Oh, where'd she go?
I'm here.
Oh, she's
Oh,
there.
okay, there you are.
Like she just put her hand down because she knew she was coming up.
Yeah.
I was like, where'd she go? I can't click her video.
Kind of evolved past the point where I wanted to make a comment, but it was more on the idea that when you're rebuilding trust with someone, it's bids. It's these tiny little things like, I'm going to say this, and you kind of see how they respond. And was it good? Did it feel good? And then you make a bit bigger bid and see how they respond to that. So it's that you build up that emotional bank of trust. And it's always a risk, no matter what's a risk. Even in a relationship, it's a risk, but is it worth the risk? It should be worth the risk. It should be somebody that's saying, yeah, I really want to spend time with you. I want to get to know you. And it could end up in a broken heart, but it's a risk I want to take. That's the comment that I had for that. But my question to the group is, how does unconditional love, which we are often taught in church culture, how does it play into facilitating negative behaviors and abusive types of behaviors? Because in my opinion, we say unconditional love and love them unconditionally and all these kind of things because it's what we're kind of taught. And so in many ways we accept too much and we don't put up those boundaries too soon enough. I think that unconditional love extends from like Heavenly Father to us as his children and us as parents to our children, both in a horizontal type relationship, within a spousal relationship or peer relationships or friend relationships. We should not really facilitate unconditional love because there needs to be healthy boundaries. We can still have Christ-like love for them, but we don't love them unconditionally because sometimes there's things that break that. And it's not okay because we start to lose ourselves in that process. But that's my thoughts. When everybody else thought the same.
I think you're
I actually think
absolutely
there's
correct.
two different
Heather.
types of love, but yeah, go ahead, Jokae.
I don't think that there is love without conditions.
Yeah, because Heavenly Father also has conditions on us too. Like we have to meet these criteria. We have these covenants that we've made, these promises we've kept. So in that regard, there is conditions, but at the same, it is unconditional because he's found a way back. We're always allowed to come back. We always can be made whole. But sometimes there's not that with our mortal relationships. Does that make sense?
So I actually disagree just a little bit. I think that there are different types of love. God loves us perfectly without any conditions. I really do believe that, right? Whether or not he can bless us in the ways that he wants to, that is dependent on conditions, right? Just like with your kids, I love my son regardless of what he does. Even if he does horrible things, I deeply care for him and love him. But I do feel the need, because of my love, to hold him accountable for the choices that he makes. And so I think that that's a really important thing to like just a way to distinguish, because I think sometimes, and I've heard this a lot recently, where people are like, oh, well, God doesn't love us unconditionally. We shouldn't love each other unconditionally. And I'm like, well, I actually think we do, right? I just don't think that my ability to love someone else as Christ loves them, that's separate from romantic love. And I think that's the part that we need to be really careful about. And it's separate from how we hold each other to account for our choices, right? We can love people and have boundaries. We can love people unconditionally and see their divine worth, see their divine nature, want the best things for them, and still say, these are the consequences of your choices.
Yeah, I think that the English language fails us because we only have one word, love, when other languages have many different terms for that, for the different feelings and different areas of love. So English language is their fault. It's interesting that you say you have, sorry, go ahead, Corey.
Oh, no, I was going to say, yeah, you're right, because in Spanish, they can start off by saying te quiero, which is like, I'm affectionate. I'm starting to have feelings for you before it really grows into amor. And so you have different levels you can express, So I think
we
you're
just have
right.
I like you and I love you, and then that's it. And then we get I really like you a lot. But
Yeah.
We are better off than Hungarian, though, because that's one word. Like and love are the same word in Hungarian. So they really got it tough over there.
That's pretty cool. Well, thanks, Heather. Thanks for jumping in and talking with us. Appreciate that.
And it's a really good point. I'm glad that she
It
brought
is.
it up. It's really good.
Really good point.
And it
Any
fits.
other questions or comments? Anybody want to jump on?
If not, I'll tell a story real quick about fear
Sure.
for fun. And this was a dream that Tanny Bennett had. Lives up in Snowflake, Arizona, so it's not mine. Fair enough. She says one day I woke up, or how did she say? I went to the door, and because there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and at the door was fear. And she's like, I didn't want fear to come in. I didn't like fear. I don't want fear. But he came in the house anyway. And she's like, I didn't know what to do with him. So I took him and I put him in the closet. And I went about my daily life. I thought things were good, thought it was fine. But every once in a while, I'd hear him banging on the door, let me out, let me out, let me out, right? Because I'm still afraid of fear. And so after a long period of time goes by, I go to the closet and I open the door and fear comes out. And what he does is he walks around and he touches me on each one of my shoulders. I acknowledge him, and then he walked out the back door. So in the acknowledging, like Corey says, being vulnerable, I allow fear to leave. And even if somebody doesn't accept me, I can still move on because I know my worth, because I know God loves me.
Yeah, I love that a
Yeah.
lot.
So I don't know if you guys, you ever listen to Dr. Jordan Peterson, the psychologist from Canada? Pretty famous guy, but he talked about fear and his 12 rules for life. And he says, you cannot be protected from the things that frighten you and hurt you. But if you identify with the part of you being that is responsible for transformation, then you are always the equal or more than the equal of the things that frighten you. So it's kind of interesting to think of it that way.
I like that. Tanya also actually had a question, and then Julie, I think.
Okay, so who's up first?
So Tanya's up first. So
Okay, let's jump on Tanya.
Are you there?
Yep,
I'm
see-
here. Sorry.
she's getting
Sorry.
her video and everything set.
Well, and somebody's watching the fight here, so I'm like, you got to turn that down for a minute. So anyhow, you said something, Jacob, earlier about your ex-husband moving to where you live now, and you said that's brought along a lot of different emotions and feelings. Do you consider regaining trust with him and getting back together somewhat, or no? I came in a little bit late, just know that, so maybe I missed something that was very.
No, you didn't. It's been an adjustment period because I think for different places that he's lived and when he's been closer or whatever, I had to establish boundaries, and I haven't had to be as strict with some of those for a while because he hasn't had much contact with us, or the kids aren't seeing him as much. And so it's adjustment to say, hey, this is my space. You're not allowed to be here. No, he burnt too many bridges. And I don't think that he could convince me that he loves me, that he would do what it would take.
But if he could,
If it was possible, if he could do it, I imagine there is a spot in there somewhere where I might allow it to happen, maybe for in the beginning for the kids' sake or something. But for a long time, I left a door open for him to come back or to choose that. And the trust has been broken in so many different ways. It would take a process for him to rebuild that for me, to allow him in a romantic relationship again.
But
So
it's still at least if there's a thought there that's not impossible.
Maybe.
She's like, maybe.
Because I can trust him as their father, you know, and honor him that way, and create a good working relationship, co-parenting even. But I don't know about romantically.
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting because, you know, for myself, there's absolutely no possibilities that I'd ever feel those feelings towards my ex-husband. But so it's interesting to hear that, you know, and see, because there are people. I met a guy the other day that I was helping through work, and he said, yeah, I've been married to the same woman now for 40 years. We were divorced for a little bit, but I remarried her and said it was the best thing I ever did in my life. So, I mean, there's people that, you know, get through it and they rebuild their marriage and they work it out.
I know as temple president in Snowflake, who they were divorced for 10 years, and then they got back together and have been together, I don't know how many years, and have served now as temple presidents. It can happen. It's possible.
Yeah.
I think it's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Agree. But he made an effort to move closer to you, so I thought that was interesting.
I think it's an effort to be closer to the kids, not close to me. Thanks, Tanya.
You never know. I'm kidding. I'm totally.
You don't. Heavenly Father can do amazing things. You just have to have, you know, faith, I guess.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking at first when Jokae said there were like mixed feelings. I was like, oh yeah, because my ex might be moving to Chicago, like, and he hasn't lived near me since my son was 2. But for me, all the mixed feelings were like anxiety, just like, what does this mean to have like a totally different,
mostly
to have someone
anxiety.
someone who hasn't been there this whole time to come back and be in the same place, which was, whew, talk about fear.
All right, so next we have Julie.
Julie's up.
Unmute yourself, and if you want to do video, you can.
Can you hear me? Did you say you wanted video or just mute or just
It's up to you.
Yeah, if you want to do video, totally fine. If you don't, then totally fine.
We like
to see your
video.
gorgeous face.
We like your face.
Oh, come on.
Well, actually, I wanted to talk about the different kinds of love, but then as we were talking, I had a different comment, and so I'd rather talk. I liked when they were talking about fear, because one thing that a really great therapist had shared with my brother, and the therapist went to high school with me, but he's really good. And one thing that he had shared is we let emotions drive the car too much. And for me, it was just like the visual of it that was helpful. So I thought maybe it would be helpful to someone else. You don't want to stuff your emotions, whether it's fear or anything else, in the trunk, because you need them to give you input. You need their input, and you want that. You know, all those things are kind of based on your experiences and the knowledge of, you know, your inner workings of your own heart and soul. But you also don't want it to drive the car. And so, like, I kind of like the idea of putting your emotions with relationships in their proper place, which is like, you know, they can like sit in the passenger seat and they don't have the wheel and they don't have the brakes and they don't have the gas, but they can see what's going on and give input as to where you decide you want to go. But for me, that was helpful, because I think too often I stuff them in the trunk. And I'm like, I don't need you. You are too much trouble. You're way too much trouble than you're worth. But then when I pull them out, they want to drive the car because they're mad, I guess, that I haven't taken their input. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's too easy to have it be one way or the other, instead of like, they're in their proper place and you're giving them, you know, the place that they need to be in your decision-making process.
Thank you for that, Julie.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, Julie, thank you.
Welcome.
I mean, it kind of made me think about, like, in a lot of ways, like, you can't have faith or courage without fear. Like, you can't be brave if you're not feeling fear. You can't
Oh,
exercise
true.
faith if you're not feeling fear or doubt, right? Like you have to have that opposition to be able to act in the ways that are going to enable you to grow.
Well, they'll say like for firefighters and people who are doing dangerous jobs, they say if you don't have fear, if you say, "Oh, I don't have fear, I'm just going to run in that burning building," then you're a dead man. You're stupid.
Yeah.
Because it's the fear that keeps you sharp. It's the fear that keeps you focused. It's the bravery that says, "My whole body says don't run in that burning building, but
So
I want to
I'm-
go."
So it's kind of funny that you bring that up because I actually volunteer at the fire department, and it is very true. And it's also the unknown, not knowing what's around that corner. You have to just slightly, but sometimes that's life saving. So, you know, it's okay to have a level of fear. It's just not okay to let it hold you back.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's also the presence of fear that makes vulnerability so meaningful. And so like that makes it have such an impact in our relationships, right? Is because it's something that we're willing to do, even when it's scary and even when it's hard. Like that gives it substance.
And not to keep bringing like tactical stuff up, but it's just stuff that's been said in the past. But like even in a tactical manner, or in a firefighter manner, they'll say that if you're not moving, you're dying. And there's probably that's probably wisdom in everything besides bullets flying at you or fire around you. That if you freeze and you stand still, that you're not progressing, you're not improving, you're not being, you're just basically dying, just standing there. So, in relationships, I think everybody out there that hears me, or that's here in this podcast, if you're just standing still and you're not moving towards trying to get a relationship, trying to date, trying to meet people, then you're just dying. You're still. And so take that into advice also. Be brave, like Terry said. Be brave and be willing to go into the fire because it's for your good. It's for somebody's good. And don't stand still because if you're not moving, you're dying. So those are the two tactical expressions that you can relate to your life every day.
Oh, and do something that's very scary. I jumped out of a perfectly good plane. I went skydiving in Australia. And I was fine probably up until we got to the open door of the plane, right? And there's all this empty space. I'm like, what am I thinking? But now it's too late. Okay. But everything else seems minimal now. Go tell somebody I'm sorry. Woo-hoo, that's not hard. It's not the same as jumping out of a plane.
Yeah. Practicing being brave, right? I used to jump in the lake in Lake Michigan on the 1st of January every year with that same kind of attitude. I was like, well, if I can jump in Lake Michigan on January 1st, I can do anything this year.
Yeah, you can. Wow, that's cold.
It's so cold. Well, the last time I did it, I couldn't control my body temperature for like a week. So I decided I probably needed to stop, but it's fun.
Those ice runoff lakes, man. Even in May, I thought they were cold. I thought my chest was going to freeze to death or something. I don't know.
Right.
You're brave. That's hard.
I think when we were talking about like apologizing, I think the biggest thing is it just admitting that you're wrong and correcting it. And you know, that can be a hard thing to do, but you know, it's very powerful for both people when that happens.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
say something on that, but
And with that, we could just jump into a metaphorical Lake Michigan and do the after party.
That's right. Segue.
ready for the after party.
Everybody get over your fear, turn on your cameras, jump in the conversation.
So this is the point. This is the point of the show where we kind of have an after party, and we let everybody kind of come in and just kind of chill out and just talk about anything. It doesn't have to be about the topic. It could be about Star Wars or whatever you want to talk about. Firefighting. It could be whatever you want to